The stars shimmered with distant indifference as the tension aboard the Titan A coiled tighter with every passing moment. Once a symbol of exploration and diplomacy, Starfleet now found itself on the brink of transformation, its idealism tested against a mounting threat that no one fully understood. At the center of this unfolding crisis stood Admiral Jean-Luc Picard, a man long past his years in active command, yet forever burdened by the weight of duty. His legacy, once etched in the peaceful aspirations of the Federation, was now caught in the gravity of a new conflict, one that echoed the conspiracies and betrayals of past wars. Beside him, Captain William Riker wrestled silently with his own ghosts. Gone was the jovial, defiant commander of the Enterprise D. In his place stood a man whose grief for a lost son colored every command decision with hesitation. The friendship between Picard and Riker, once unshakable, now carried a brittle edge. Their differences had cracked open under pressure in earlier episodes. The Titan A caught between tactical survival and moral responsibility. Their bond, though still resilient, had been tested aboard this ship more than it had in decades of service. Then there were 7 of 9, standing at a literal and ideological intersection of what Starfleet was and what it might become. Stripped of her command title, but never her resolve, she moved through the Titan's corridors like a blade honed by war. Her former life with the Borg still haunted the edges of her presence, making her both invaluable and distrusted. Starfleet had always claimed to believe in redemption, but Seven's treatment proved that trust was rationed in times of fear. And fear now infected everything, from the crew's whispers to the encrypted transmissions flickering in the dark. Raffi Musiker worked in the shadows, infiltrating networks the Federation dared not publicly acknowledge. Her work with Worf, whose reappearance had shocked and stabilized the season in equal measure, had already uncovered a terrifying possibility. The Changelings, shape-shifting remnants of the Dominion War, had returned. But this time, they were not soldiers. They were saboteurs. Subtle, precise, patient. Their infiltration wasn't designed to wage open war, but to rot the Federation from within, undetected until too late. The paranoia of the spawn touched every level of command, and no one, not even Picard, could be sure who or what they were dealing with. In this crucible of uncertainty, Jack Crusher emerged as the anomaly that no one knew how to explain. The son Picard never knew he had, Jack was more than a personal revelation. He was a mystery wrapped in tension. Hunted by unknown forces, plagued by visions, incapable of actions he himself couldn't understand, Jack carried something dark within him, something ancient and watching. Beverly Crusher, his mother, had done everything to protect him, isolating herself for years to hide the truth. But secrets, like gravity, always pull things down in the end. The arrival of Starfleet was supposed to be a moment of reassurance. A fleet assembled in unity was, for generations, the Federation's most comforting image. But now, as ships gathered under coded orders and automated protocols, something about their precision fell off. Too perfect, too synchronized. It wasn't unity, it was rigidity. And rigidity meant vulnerability. Those who had survived the Dominion War, like Worf and Raffi, knew that an enemy capable of mimicking form could also mimic order. The deeper the coordination, the more terrifying the possibility that the fleet was no longer fully in control of itself. Tensions on the Titan A mirrored this growing dread. Communication with command was being filtered. Orders were coming from faceless admirals and rarely questioned, despite the lingering doubt in every officer's voice. Even among friends, trust was becoming a rare and dangerous commodity. It was no longer enough to know someone's record. You had to know their soul. Picard felt this most acutely in Jack, whose wildness reminded him more of Kirk than any Starfleet cadet, yet whose dreams, and now unexplained psychic episodes, hinted at something else entirely. Something that frightened Beverly deeply. As the ship moved through dark space toward rendezvous with the fleet, the crew prepared for what they hoped would be protection, but hope had grown thin. Even the younger officers, inspired by the legends serving alongside them, began to ask quieter, more urgent questions. What if Starfleet itself was compromised? What if their leaders were not who they claimed to be? And what if the very institution meant to protect the galaxy had already been turned into a weapon against it? There was little time for answers, only choices. Picard knew this better than anyone. He'd made impossible decisions before, choices that had cost lives, reputations, entire timelines. But this time, the choices came shrouded in ambiguity. Every option was clouded by uncertainty, every ally potentially an enemy. He looked across the bridge and saw echoes of his past in the faces around him. The boldness of Data and Ensign LaForge, the empathy of Troy and Sydney's soft steadiness, the courage of Worf mirrored in Seven's defiance. Still, something loomed ahead. The rendezvous was no ordinary meeting. Reports suggested the fleet was mobilizing faster than protocol demanded, with patterns too efficient to be accidental. They weren't just gathering, they were converging, aligning, syncing in a way that felt unnatural. The Titan wasn't just approaching allies. It was drifting into something else entirely. And yet, within that dread was the one thing Picard had always trusted above all, the truth and those willing to seek it. If Starfleet was compromised, if Jack was more than just a young man with a name and a troubled legacy, if the Federation was on the brink of unraveling, then now was the moment when legends had to step into the shadowed halls of their past and carry the light one more time. The Titan's engines hummed quietly as the fleet's signal pinged across the silence of space. The stars remained silent, and in that silence, every crew member held their breath, waiting not just for orders but for truth, because what arrived next would change everything. The stars parted as the Titan A slid into formation, its hull glinting in the dim light of a distant star. Before it stretched a vision that might have once inspired awe, row upon row of gleaming Starfleet vessels, assembled with absolute precision. It should have been a comfort, a symbol of unity, a promise that the Federation still stood strong. But as Picard surveyed the vast fleet through the viewport, he felt no reassurance, only a quiet, growing unease. They had arrived at the edge of something vast, and perhaps unknowable. The fleet's presence, instead of bolstering hope, cast a long shadow across their mission. Dozens of ships, each identical in silhouette, held their positions with uncanny uniformity. Too uniform. Their configurations, their lighting, even their transponder rhythms fell into an eerie synchronicity. Riker had noticed it too. He didn't speak of it aloud, but the slight narrowing of his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders, betrayed a mounting tension. This wasn't the Starfleet either of them remembered. This new fleet had been forged in a time of paranoia and silence. After decades of peace shattered by war, invasion, and betrayal, Starfleet had evolved into something colder, more exacting. The romanticism that once defined its missions, diplomatic exploration, scientific curiosity, cultural exchange, had calcified into an organization obsessed with order. Survival had its price, and it was paid in flexibility. And so, as the Titan approached its designated position, a holographic display activated on the bridge, revealing Admiral Shelby's familiar yet hardened face. She was commanding the fleet's movements from the USS Enterprise G, her voice clipped and authoritative, her words wrapped in the crisp language of protocol. The same Shelby who once challenged Picard's caution decades ago now embodied the very rigidity she once resisted. Her presence should have brought a sense of familiarity, but all it brought was dread. Jack Crusher stood off to the side of the bridge, arms crossed, watching the exchange with a restlessness he couldn't quite explain. The fleet bothered him, though he couldn't say why. Something about their order felt oppressive, like the weight of 100 eyes watching him through mirrored glass. His unease wasn't just observational. It was visceral. He could feel it, deep in his chest, like pressure before a storm. 7 of 9 didn't hide her mistrust. She lingered near the tactical console, fingers hovering over sensors calibrated to scan for anomalies. No one had told her to expect anything unusual, but instinct demanded vigilance. In this configuration, the fleet could fire simultaneously and obliterate a threat before it could respond. A terrifying efficiency. But what happened if that threat was misidentified, or worse, fabricated? Behind her, Sydney LaForge glanced nervously between consoles. She wasn't just reacting to the external tension. She felt the internal shift. People were quieter, more guarded. The once open camaraderie on the bridge had transformed into silence filled with restrained suspicion. Even laughter had become a rarity. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran diagnostics, uncertain whether she feared a technical failure or the idea that her systems might reveal something she didn't want to see. And still, the ships held formation, lined up like weapons in a showcase. Every hull pristine, every engine at the ready. The design philosophy had changed. Gone were the varied silhouettes of older fleets, replaced now by a homogenized class of ships engineered for predictability. What had once been a canvas of diversity now resembled a single brushstroke, repeated over and over. It was unity, yes, but it was also erasure. The individuality of each vessel, each crew, each purpose, had been subsumed into a single doctrine: control. Picard recognized the signs. He'd seen it before, during the board's relentless march, how the lure of perfect order, of singular vision, could seduce entire civilizations. This wasn't simulation, but it was mimicry. The irony curdled in his mouth. The Federation, in its fear of the chaotic galaxy, had begun to resemble the very enemy it had once defeated. Riker broke the silence with a glance. "Too quiet," he murmured, not just about the ships, but the mood. There had been no updates from command beyond their immediate orders. No chatter between vessels. No friendly hails. Just silent precision. It felt less like a fleet and more like a net. Raffi's voice came over a secured channel. She and Worf had embedded themselves deep in a hidden investigation, tracking evidence of changeling infiltration through the highest ranks. What they'd uncovered was disturbing. Signs of interference in fleet protocols, unusual command overrides, even classified technology being rerouted to unknown destinations. The pieces didn't yet form a complete picture, but the edges were sharp enough to bleed. Their warning reached Picard moments before Shelby's transmission ended. Something was wrong at the core of Starfleet's new protocols. The new fleet systems were interconnected, synced in real time, allowing for collective action, but also collective vulnerability. If control could be centralized, it could also be hijacked. And if hijacked, the consequences would be catastrophic. Suddenly, Jack staggered. His hands clutched the edge of a console, his breathing shallow. He looked up, eyes wide, as if seeing through the metal and glass of the bridge into something far beyond. Voices. He heard voices. Not just one, but 1,000, speaking in unison. Not in words, but intentions. They weren't human. They weren't anything he understood. But they were aware, and they were watching. Beverly rushed to his side, steadying him. His episodes had grown more intense, more frequent, and always they coincided with proximity to Starfleet systems. She had stopped trying to rationalize it. Something about Jack resonated with this network, this fleet, this new kind of order. He wasn't just reacting to it. He was connected to it. 7 turned sharply as a series of unreadable energy signatures blinked on her console, brief, too quick to lock, almost like a signal bouncing between ships. A handshake or a warning. The same pattern that had emerged during previous changeling activity. The fleet wasn't just ready. It was primed. Picard stepped forward, hands clenched behind his back, gaze fixed on the screen as the formation settled into full synchronization. The Titan had docked with the beast. He could feel it, as surely as Jack felt whatever stirred within him. This wasn't protection. It was preparation. A staging ground for something yet unrevealed. And in that moment, the Titan, once a ship of freedom, now felt like a cell. As silence returned to the bridge, there was no victory. Only the cold hum of engines, the flicker of artificial stars on the view screen, and the rising awareness that what they had stepped into was not a sanctuary. It was a crucible. And whatever truth lay at the center of this fleet, whatever force had twisted Starfleet's once noble image into this unblinking machine, it was watching, waiting, and perhaps it had already begun. Jack stood alone in the Titan's observation lounge, his reflection ghosted against the stars. The fleet's mirrored order stretched beyond the glass, like an endless graveyard of identity. He couldn't sleep, not that sleep offered much peace anymore. Every time he closed his eyes, the voices returned. Whispers, pulses, not in language but feeling, urgency, hunger, something ancient scratching beneath the floorboards of his mind. He clenched his fists, trying to ground himself in the silence of the room. It didn't work. It never did. Behind him, the door hissed open. Beverly stepped inside quietly, her face a practiced calm. She had the look of someone who had faced the worst and survived it, only to find herself staring down something stranger than death. Her son, no longer just her secret, now stood at the heart of something vast. And still, she hadn't told him everything. Not yet. You felt it again, she said, not as a question but recognition. Jack nodded slowly, still facing the stars. It's not just me anymore. It's reaching out. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. And what is it saying? He turned then, eyes burning with frustration. That I belong to it, that it's in me, and that whatever's coming, I'm part of it. Beverly said nothing, because no comfort she could offer would sound honest. She'd spent years hiding Jack from forces she barely understood, but the truth was no longer content to wait in the shadows. And she feared the moment it revealed itself. It would consume them all. On the bridge, Picard stood with Riker and Seven as the latest scans from the fleet came in. The synchronization was now beyond protocol. Systems across all ships were beginning to operate as one: navigation, targeting. Even life support were responding to a centralized rhythm. No one in command would admit it, but Picard knew what he was seeing. The fleet was being prepped for something. Unified, streamlined, weaponized. It's not a network anymore, Seven said grimly. It's a single organism. Riker crossed his arms, unease etched across his features. You're saying someone or something has control of the entire fleet? No, I'm saying something is becoming the fleet. Before the implications could settle, a coded transmission came through. Raffi and Worf, finally back on secure channel. The display crackled before their images resolved, faces hard with urgency. We were right, Raffi said without preamble. It's the Changelings, but not just a few rogue cells. There's something deeper. They've infiltrated the command software itself, fleet operations, interconnectivity protocols. They're using Starfleet's own redesign to take control from within. Worf leaned forward, voice even and grave. We believe the fleet is no longer under Federation control. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then who controls it? Picard asked. We don't know, Raffi admitted, but they're using the Frontier Day celebration as cover. Every major ship in the quadrant, synchronized and primed. It's a tactical nightmare, if they give a single command. They could wipe out entire planets, Riker finished, the weight of the realization settling on his shoulders. The implication was staggering. A fleet once created to defend now stood poised to destroy, all under the illusion of celebration and unity. Picard's mind raced. He had seen genocidal power in the hands of the Borg, of the Romulans, of corrupt men and machines alike, but never so cleverly disguised, never so deeply embedded in the institution he had given his life to serve. Back in engineering, Geordi LaForge worked frankly alongside his daughters, Alandra and Sydney. The more they studied the fleet's integration code, the more disturbing the pattern became. It wasn't just a takeover. It was evolution. The new fleet automation protocols, originally designed to foster unity and efficiency, had become a framework for control. Geordi had helped build parts of the system, believing it would protect future generations. Now he realized it had opened a door no one knew existed. There's a signal, Sydney said, pulling up telemetry, not from any known source. It's bouncing through subspace relays, embedding itself in every command line. And it's pulsing, Alandra added, almost like a heartbeat. Geordi's eyes darkened. Or a countdown. Picard joined them minutes later, Jack trailing behind him with a hesitant energy that seemed to radiate confusion and guilt. They all gathered around the console as the data unfolded. Lines of code, untraceable commands, hidden triggers waiting for activation. Jack's eyes flicked toward the pulse, and his breath caught. I've seen that, he whispered. In my dreams. Everyone turned to him. It's like the Red Door. Every time I get close, I see that pulse. It's not just a signal. It's alive. The room fell into a stunned silence. Beverly stepped forward. You said you were hearing voices. What else? They're not voices. Not really. More like intentions. And I think they want me to open something. Geordi exchanged a look with Picard. If that pulse is connected to Jack, it could mean he's more than just a conduit. He might be the trigger. No, Beverly said sharply. That's not possible. But her voice held a tremor that said she feared otherwise. Picard placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. We need to understand this. Whatever is happening to you, it's not your fault. But if you're the key, then we need to know why. Jack met his gaze, eyes filled with uncertainty, then nodded. Then let's open the door. Even as they prepared to dive deeper into the anomaly, the fleet began to move, not all at once, but in subtle, terrifying unison. Ships began to adjust formation, their engines firing with identical thrust levels, their systems flickering to life in cascading waves. On every deck of the Titan A, officers paused, watching consoles come alive without command. An entire armada shifting, not with orders, but with instinct. 7 shouted across the bridge. They're aligning weapons. On what target? Riker demanded. Picard's voice came low and cold. They don't need one. They are the weapon. Outside, the stars fell behind the expanding silhouette of the fleet as the ship slowly turned toward a single, unified heading. Whatever was behind the red door, inside Jack, inside the system, inside the pulse, was awakening, and it was no longer asking permission. The red door stood before him, not metaphorical, not symbolic, but real. Jack reached out, fingers trembling, as the pulse echoed louder in his ears with every heartbeat. The room around him dissolved into a shimmer of static, a borderland between the physical and something else entirely. Behind the door was not just truth, it was presence. Something vast, sentient, ancient. He didn't know how he had come here, whether it was dream, memory, or induced vision, but he felt its will wrapping around him like gravity. His fingers brushed the surface, and the metal rippled like water. Voices surged forward, not whispering now, but speaking in layered echoes. Open us. We see you. You are not alone. Jack staggered back. His instincts screamed to flee, yet something deeper, a fragment of identity buried too long, urged him to listen. The door was not a prison. It was a mirror, and it was time to see what stared back. Elsewhere on the Titan, the bridge was a storm of movement. 7 barked orders across the consoles, trying to isolate command authority as the fleet locked into final formation. The ships had ceased communicating with Starfleet Command. Whatever intelligence now guided them had severed outside access. A storm was coming, and they were sailing directly into it. We've lost mainframe separation, Geordi reported through gritted teeth from engineering. Every ship system is hardwired to the fleet network. If we don't find a manual override, they'll follow this thing to the end. Riker paced like a caged animal, and if we try to break the chain, they'll see it as a threat, 7 answered, and they'll respond like a single organism protecting itself. Picard listened, brow furrowed, while Beverly hovered near the medical console, scanning for any change in Jack's vitals. His body lay in the medbay, still breathing but unresponsive. Whatever connection had pulled him inward now held him in stasis. Suddenly, Worf and Raffi returned from the security annex, faces grim. "It's worse than we thought," Raffi said, tossing a portable display on the table. It flickered to life with a map of the system. A subspace burst originated from within the fleet core 2 minutes ago. Every relay across the quadrant is echoing it. Picard narrowed his eyes. A signal? Worf nodded once. Or a summons? Beverly's voice was taut. Summoning what? Silence answered, filled only by the distant thrum of the Titan's engines. Inside the vision, Jack stepped through the door. It wasn't a room. It was a mind, infinite and fluid. Every surface pulsed with synaptic light, like neurons firing in a cosmic brain. The air, if it could be called that, was heavy with memory. He saw faces, places, battles long past, the fall of planets, the rise of tyrants. And at the center of it all, a shape forming in the dark, vast, organic, and composed not of flesh but thought. The voice returned. We are the evolution of survival, born of lost matter, fed on forgotten minds. You are the bridge. Jack cried out, trying to hold on to himself. What do you want from me? To return. to complete the circle, to bring the many through you. He felt the pressure inside him build, cells stirring, nerves firing, as if he were being rewritten from the inside. It wasn't just knowledge flowing through the door, it was them. And unless he stopped it, they would come. Back on the bridge, the fleet had begun to charge weapons. The ship's orientation now faced toward key outposts, planetary centers, even Earth itself. Starfleet's greatest bastion had been turned into a loaded phaser array. Picard stood still, expression steel with horror. "We have to sever the link," he said, "before the signal fully activates." "Easier said than done," Riker muttered. "Unless we can override fleet protocols from within, we're out of time." "Then we go through the source," Beverly said suddenly, eyes fixed on the monitor. "Through Jack." Geordi looked up. "You want to enter his neural link?" Beverly nodded. The doors opened. "He's inside something. If we can get him to fight it, resist it, maybe we can sever its hold." Seven turned toward Picard. "That's a hell of a gamble." Picard met her eyes. "Then let's make it count." Within minutes, Beverly and Geordi had rigged a neural feedback loop, connecting Picard directly to Jack. The elder man sat beside the unconscious youth. Their hands clasped as the device hummed to life. For a moment, there was only static. Then light. Picard stood at the edge of the same strange threshold, the door still shimmering. "Open now," spilling light into the void. "Jack," he called, stepping inside. Jack turned toward him, pale and sweat-slicked, eyes wide with terror and awe. The shape in the dark loomed behind him, a wave of minds pressing forward. "I can't stop it," Jack whispered. "It's already inside." "You're not alone," Picard said, voice firm. "Whatever this is, whoever they are, they need you, but you don't need them." Jack's voice cracked. "You don't know what it's like. To be wanted, finally, to belong." "I do," Picard said and stepped closer. "Because I've lived long enough to see that sometimes the need to belong can blind us. You belong with us, Jack, with your family, not them." The thing in the dark began to move, sensing defiance. It surged, a cloud of will and history, claws of memory tearing at the space around them. But Jack gritted his teeth, pressing his palms to his temples. "I can hold it, just long enough, but you have to end the signal." Back in engineering, Geordi saw the opening. The code controlling the fleet's coordination flickered, momentarily destabilized by Jack's resistance. He shouted into the comms, "Now!" Seven slammed the override. A surge of energy coursed through the Titan systems, crashing into the fleet network like a wave. The signal buckled. The synchronization fractured. Ships staggered, breaking formation. Systems reverted to local command. Firewalls re-engaged. The fleet, once a singular mind, became scattered voices again. And Jack opened his eyes. He gasped as if surfacing from deep water, and Beverly caught him in her arms. The connection severed. The room around them vibrated with the echo of the broken link, but the threat had passed. For now, on the bridge, Seven confirmed the fleet's retreat from coordinated posture. Riker exhaled. The first real breath he'd taken in hours. Picard stepped back from Jack's side, drained but resolute. He looked to Beverly, then to the screen where the last remnants of the signal flickered out. "It wasn't just infiltration," he said. "It was an invitation, one we almost accepted without knowing." Raffi stared at the data feed. "How long before they try again?" Worf answered calmly, "Not long, but next time we will not be unprepared." Outside, the fleet floated in disarray, scattered and blinking like confused stars. Unity had been broken, but the enemy had glimpsed the path. And somewhere beyond the stars, beyond the shattered network and fading echoes, the many waited still, waiting for the door to open again.